Busan feared him. Men lowered their eyes when he entered a room. Empires rose and fell with a single decision he made in silence. Yet one woman, a single mother with no power, no protection, and no intention of impressing anyone, looked at him and saw nothing worth fearing. She didn't know he ruled the underworld. He didn't know she would become the reason he'd abandon it. And by the time the truth surfaced, walking away was no longer an option for either of them. Before we continue, don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. This will make me so happy. Busan never spoke his name out loud. They didn't need to. In the city's most powerful rooms, behind smoked glass and polished marble, conversations would slow the moment Chairman Kang Do-yoon was mentioned. Not because he was loud. Not because he threatened. But because everything he touched fell into order. He arrived at his office before sunrise, as he always did. The building overlooked the harbor, where cargo ships drifted in and out like obedient shadows. From his window, Do-yoon watched the city breathe, measured, predictable, under control. His phone vibrated once. A single message. Resolved. That was all it ever said. Do-yoon placed the phone face down and continued reading financial reports. No anger. No satisfaction. Power, to him, was never about emotion. It was about absence, the absence of chaos, of resistance, of noise. Inside his organization, he was known for one rule above all others. No recklessness. No unnecessary harm. Fear followed him anyway. Men feared silence more than shouting. Later that morning, the office building slowly came alive. Elevators chimed. Footsteps echoed. Staff moved carefully, instinctively lowering their voices when passing his door. They didn't know what he truly was, only that he was important, untouchable. Do-yoon preferred it that way. At precisely 8:47 a.m., there was a soft knock. Come in, he said. The door opened, and a woman stepped inside carrying a thin stack of files. She bowed politely. Not deeply. Not carelessly. Just enough. I'm Han Seo-rin from Records, she said. I was told to deliver these personally. Her voice was calm. Steady. Unimpressed. Do-yoon looked up. Something shifted. Not in the room, within him. She didn't hesitate. Didn't study his expression. Didn't shrink under his gaze like everyone else did. She simply walked forward, placed the files on his desk, and waited. The sunlight from the window caught the side of her face, tired eyes, quiet strength, a life lived carefully. No jewelry beyond a simple watch. No ambition written in her posture. Just purpose. You're new, he said. Yes, she replied. 3 months. Most people filled silence with excuses. She didn't. Do-yoon nodded once. You may go. She bowed again and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. Sir, she added gently, the building lights on your floor stay on very late. If you'd like, I can adjust the schedule to save energy. A suggestion. Not a demand. Not fear. He studied her for a long second. Do as you see fit, he said. Seo-rin inclined her head and left. The door closed. The office returned to silence, but it felt different now. Do-yoon leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the empty space she had occupied moments before. For the first time in years, something had entered his world without permission. And he hadn't stopped it. Outside, Busan continued as it always had, unaware that the man it feared had just met the woman who would quietly change everything. Han Seo-rin's mornings began before the city fully woke. The kettle whistled softly as dawn light crept through the narrow kitchen window. She moved with practiced quiet, careful not to wake her son too early. Breakfast was simple, warm rice, eggs, sliced fruit arranged neatly on a small plate. Not because it had to look perfect, but because routine was her form of stability. Her son sat at the table, swinging his legs slightly as he ate, humming to himself. Did you sleep well? She asked. He nodded, smiling. I dreamed about the ocean. She smiled back. Busan had a way of giving people dreams they didn't know they needed. After walking him to school, Seo-rin took the longer route to work. The streets near the harbor were calmer in the mornings, filled with vendors setting up stalls and fishermen untangling nets. She liked watching the city in its honest hours, before power and ambition took over. At the foundation building, Seo-rin blended into the rhythm of work. Filing records. Cataloging archives. Cleaning offices that smelled of wealth and quiet authority. She never lingered. Never asked questions. But she noticed everything. She noticed which executives treated staff like furniture. Which ones offered polite greetings they didn't mean. And she noticed him, the man on the top floor who stayed long after sunset. Chairman Kong. That was all she knew him as. She didn't know why people lowered their voices around him. Didn't know why meetings ended abruptly when he passed by. To her, he was simply a man who worked too much and spoke too little. And he never bowed to anyone either. That afternoon, Seo-rin adjusted the lighting schedule on his floor, just as she had suggested. Energy saved. Routine improved. It was her way, small, practical contributions that left no trace. As she worked, she caught her reflection in the glass wall of his office. Not glamorous. Not fragile. Just a woman who had learned how to stand on her own. She had once loved deeply. Trusted completely. She didn't anymore. During her break, Seo-rin sat alone in the staff lounge, sipping tea and reviewing her son's school calendar. Everything she did revolved around creating a future that was quiet and safe. Love, if it ever came again, would have to fit into that piece, not disrupt it. When she returned to the records room, her supervisor approached her. Seo-rin, she said softly, Chairman Kong requested you handle his document archives personally. Seo-rin blinked once. Is something wrong? No, the supervisor replied quickly. He was very calm about it. Seo-rin nodded. Calm was manageable. Later, when she entered his office again, she bowed politely, no deeper than before. No fear in her eyes. No hunger either. Do you noticed? Most people bowed too low, or not at all to prove something. Seo-rin bowed just enough to show respect, to herself. As she worked, the room remained silent except for the soft turning of pages. Do-yoon observed her from behind his desk, noting the way she handled documents carefully, as if they carried weight beyond paper. You don't ask questions, he said finally. She looked up. My job isn't to ask them. A pause. And if the answers mattered, he asked. She considered this, then replied, then they would find their way to me. It wasn't defiance. It was certainty. Do-yoon said nothing more. When Seo-rin finished, she bowed once and turned to leave. This time, he spoke before she reached the door. Han Seo-rin. She turned. You don't seem impressed by power, he said. She met his gaze calmly. Power changes often. Responsibility doesn't. She left the office without waiting for his response. Do-yoon remained still long after the door closed. In a city that bent easily. He had finally met someone who stood firm. Not out of pride. But out of purpose. The rain began in the late afternoon, soft at first, then steady, drumming against the glass walls of the foundation building. Busan always felt more honest in the rain, as if the city washed away its disguises. Seo-rin finished her work quietly, organizing the last of the archives before logging out. She checked the time. Late again, but not too late. She liked leaving when the building was nearly empty. Less noise. Fewer questions. As she stepped into the elevator, she realized she wasn't alone. The door slid shut, and the car began its slow descent. Chairman Kong stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the illuminated floor numbers. There were no aides. No security. Just two people suspended between levels. The silence felt different this time. Not heavy. Curious. COULDN glanced at the floor display, then back to the doors. It looks like the rain won't stop soon, she said, more to fill the quiet than to start a conversation. Busan rarely rushes anything, he replied. She nodded. That's why I like it here. Doyoon turned slightly. You're not from here. It wasn't a question. No, she said. But it feels forgiving. The elevator slowed briefly, then continued. A minor delay. COULDN adjusted the strap of her bag. I'm meeting my son soon. He worries if I'm late. Doyoon noted the way her voice softened at the word son. No names. No details. Just truth. That's understandable, he said. The elevator came to a stop at the lobby. The doors opened to the sound of rain and the low murmur of evening traffic. They stepped out together. Under the building's overhang, COULDN hesitated, watching the rain fall in silver lines. She hadn't brought an umbrella. Without looking at her directly, Doyoon held out one from the stand near the entrance. You may use it, he said. I have another. She blinked, surprised, not by the offer, but by the simplicity of it. Thank you, she said, accepting it. I'll return it tomorrow. There's no rush. They stood there for a moment, the city humming around them. Two strangers sharing shelter, unaware of how deeply their worlds differed. COULDN bowed lightly. Good evening, sir. He paused. Doyoon, he said. She looked up, just a fraction. COULDN. No titles. No surnames. No weight attached. They stepped into the rain in opposite directions, umbrellas moving apart like two lines briefly intersecting. From across the street, Doyoon glanced back once. COULDN was already gone, swallowed by the crowd, just another woman heading home, carrying responsibility in her stride. But something had shifted. For the first time, their connection had a shape. Not power. Not fear. Just two names exchanged in the rain. COULDN's apartment was small, but every corner had a purpose. A pair of neatly lined shoes by the door. A low bookshelf filled with worn novels and school workbooks. A single photograph on the wall, taken years ago, before life had taught her how carefully happiness must be handled. She set her bag down and slipped out of her coat just as her son appeared from his room, already in pajamas. You're home, he said, relief bright in his voice. I promised, she replied, brushing his hair gently. Did you finish your homework? He nodded. I waited for you. They ate dinner together at the small table, talking about ordinary things, school projects, a new friend, the stray cat that slept near the gate. COULDN listened closely, memorizing every detail. These moments were her anchor. Later, as he settled into bed, she sat beside him until his breathing evened out. Only then did she allow herself to exhale. In the quiet that followed, COULDN washed dishes, folded laundry, and reviewed the next day's schedule. Her life moved in routines, not because she feared chaos, but because routine was how she protected peace. She thought briefly of the man from the elevator. Doyoon. The way he had spoken her name without expectation. The way he had offered an umbrella without insisting. It lingered, faint and unfamiliar. She dismissed it. At the foundation, COULDN continued her work with the same diligence. She kept her distance, yet found herself crossing paths with Doyoon more often, hallway nods, brief exchanges about documents or schedules. Always respectful. Always measured. Never crossing a line. One afternoon, while organizing records late, COULDN noticed a light still on in his office. She paused outside the door, considering whether to mention the adjusted lighting schedule. Instead, she knocked. Yes, came his voice. I just wanted to let you know the system's working as intended, she said. The building will dim automatically after midnight. Thank you, he replied. Then, after a pause, you work late too. She smiled faintly. Some responsibilities don't wait. Neither do mine, he said. They shared a look, an unspoken understanding that neither elaborated on. COULDN left soon after, walking home beneath streetlights that flickered softly. She felt steady. Grounded. Untouched by the tension she sensed around him. What she didn't know was that Do-yoon had begun structuring his schedule around those brief moments, finishing meetings earlier, staying later on the days she worked late. Not to intrude. Just to exist in the same space. Back in his office, Do-yoon stood by the window long after she'd gone, watching the city lights blur into reflections on the glass. He had known many women in passing. None had stayed. COULDN wasn't trying to stay. And somehow, that made her impossible to ignore. In the silence of their separate lives, two paths continued forward. Unaware that routine itself was quietly drawing them closer. Chairman Kang Do-yoon had built his world on precision. Every alliance, every transaction, every command flowed through him like a carefully measured equation. Disorder was corrected before it could surface. Emotion was a liability he had long learned to lock away. Yet lately, something was off. Meetings ended earlier than scheduled. He found himself dismissing reports that once demanded his full attention. His subordinates noticed, not because he made mistakes, but because he was different. Quieter. More selective. In the upper floors of the foundation building, Do-yoon sat through a meeting with several senior executives, men who spoke in careful tones, eyes sharp with ambition. As one of them proposed an aggressive expansion, Do-yoon raised a hand. No, he said calmly. The room stilled. It draws unnecessary attention, he continued. We'll scale back. A few exchanged glances. This wasn't his usual approach. After the meeting, his most trusted associate followed him into his office. You're changing course, the man said cautiously. That's unlike you. Do-yoon didn't look up from his desk. The city doesn't need more shadows. The associate hesitated, then left without pressing further. Later that evening, COULDN crossed paths with Do-yoon in the hallway. She was carrying a box of old files, her steps measured. Those should have been archived weeks ago, he remarked lightly. She smiled. They were misplaced. I prefer to finish things properly. He watched as she adjusted her grip, then gestured. Allow me. Before she could object, he took the heavier side of the box. The gesture was quiet, almost instinctive. Thank you, she said, surprised but appreciative. They walked together to the records room, their footsteps echoing softly. When they reached the shelves, she began organizing the files while he stood aside, observing. You manage a lot on your own, he said. She didn't pause. I've learned to. A moment passed. Does it ever get tiring? He asked. She looked at him then, not guarded, not open. Just honest. Yes, she said. But giving up would be more exhausting. Something fractured inside him then, not loudly, not visibly. Just enough to let light in. That night, Do-yoon sat alone in his private study, surrounded by ledgers that once defined his life. Numbers. Assets. Control. For the first time, they felt heavy. He thought of COULDN's quiet resolve. Of the way she carried responsibility without asking the world to notice. And he realized something unsettling. She hadn't asked him to change. Yet his empire, built on fear and obedience, was already shifting, its foundations cracking under the weight of a woman who simply lived with integrity. Power had never challenged him before. Peace had. And for the first time, the man Busan feared questioned the cost of ruling it. The first sign that the truth could no longer remain hidden came quietly. COULDN noticed it in the way conversation stopped when Do-yoon entered a room. In the way unfamiliar men in tailored suits waited for him in places that didn't belong to a cultural foundation. In the way decisions, large, unseen decisions, seemed to ripple outward from his presence. She was observant by nature. And she was not naive. One evening, as she finished organizing a restricted archive, she overheard two staff members speaking in hushed voices near the stairwell. "That's not just an executive. They say he owns half the city. Be careful how you speak around him." Seorin didn't stop walking. But the words stayed with her. Later that night, she found Duyun alone in his office, jacket removed, sleeves rolled back, the city glowing behind him. She hadn't planned to confront him, but she had learned long ago that unanswered questions grow heavier with time. "Duyun," she said. He looked up immediately. "Is something wrong?" She closed the door behind her, not to trap him, but to steady herself. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to answer honestly." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right." She chose her words carefully. "You are more than what you claim to be here." It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement. The silence stretched between them. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the decision unfolding in that room. Finally, he spoke. "Yes." One word. No defense. "I didn't intend for you to find out this way," he continued. "But I won't insult you by pretending otherwise." "What are you involved in?" she asked. He didn't use names. Didn't glorify. Didn't hide behind euphemisms. "I control things most people never see," he said quietly. "I built an empire to prevent chaos, but it is still an empire built in shadow." Seorin absorbed this without flinching. "You should have told me," she said. "I know." "Why didn't you?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because I wanted one place where I could exist without it." Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with disappointment. She stepped back slightly. "Then you understand why this changes things." "Yes," he said. "Completely." She bowed, not deeply, not coldly. "Respectful." "Final." "My life is built on peace," she said. "I can't invite shadows into it. Not even quietly." "I would never let it touch what matters to you," he said. She met his gaze. "Intentions aren't enough." Then she turned toward the door. "Seorin," he said softly. She paused but did not turn around. "I never planned to keep you," he said. "But I hoped you might stay." Her voice was steady when she replied. "Hope isn't protection." She left the office without looking back. Duyun remained standing long after the door closed, the truth echoing louder than any threat he had ever faced. For the first time, the cost of his silence had a name. The days that followed were quiet, but Seorin felt the weight of the conversation like an unspoken storm. She focused on routine, her son's school, the Foundation's archives, the small, ordered life she had built for herself. Peace was her shield, and she clung to it fiercely. Duyun, meanwhile, felt the absence of her presence in ways he hadn't anticipated. Their brief interactions, shared nods, simple exchanges about documents, had been ordinary, neutral, yet now their silence felt conspicuous, almost unbearable. He realized that the structure he relied on, the order of his world, had begun to depend on her steadiness, her quiet resolve. He could not change what he was. He could not undo his empire overnight. But for the first time, he began to question if he wanted to. The turning point came one rainy evening. Duyun had arranged to meet a longtime associate at a discreet cafe near the harbor. The man spoke of expansions, alliances, and control, all with the usual edge of urgency. Duyun listened, but his mind drifted elsewhere. Thoughts of Seorin. Of the way she managed life with quiet strength. Of her son, whom he had never met, yet whose presence she spoke of so tenderly. The conversation ended, and the associate left, unaware of the silence left behind. Duyun sat alone, staring at the rain hitting the window, and made a choice that would alter everything. He would step away. Not for fear, not for threat, not for love alone, but for her peace, for the life she had built in silence. The next morning, Seo-rin arrived at the foundation to find an envelope waiting for her on the records desk. She opened it carefully. No words of apology. No excuses. Just a simple note in crisp handwriting. I have choices I cannot undo, but I will not let them touch your life. For your sake, and for his, I am stepping back. DK. She stared at the note, the weight of the gesture sinking in. He had not asked her to wait. He had not demanded forgiveness. He had simply chosen to protect her life over his own power. For the first time in weeks, Seo-rin felt something new, a quiet respect, tinged with awe. He had never bowed to anyone, but he had bowed, in his own way, to her world. That evening, she walked home beneath the soft glow of streetlights, reflecting on the strength it took to make such a choice. She did not feel relief, exactly. Nor did she feel regret. She felt clarity. And somewhere in the city, Do-yoon watched from afar, letting go, not because he had to, but because he chose to. In the quiet moments between lives, between obligations and fear, a space had opened. One that might, one day, allow two people from very different worlds to meet, not as shadows and power, but as equals. For the first time, he wondered. Could a life built on choice ever be strong enough to build love? And for the first time, he was willing to find out. The city never noticed. Chairman Kang Do-yoon moved silently, deliberately, reshaping his empire without spectacle. Deals that once signaled power were quietly ended. Assets were shifted, control handed over to trusted intermediaries. No violence. No headlines. Only the subtle removal of a man who had ruled from the shadows for years. It was meticulous work, familiar in method, unfamiliar in intention. For the first time, his empire was not a reflection of ambition or fear. It was a measure of restraint. Do-yoon spent late nights in his private office, reviewing accounts, delegating responsibilities, and ensuring the transitions were seamless. Every step was designed to leave no trace of disruption, no ripple to touch innocent lives, including Seo-rin's. He never intended to announce his withdrawal. Not to anyone. Not even her. Meanwhile, Seo-rin went about her own life, unaware of the changes unfolding around her. She continued to work late, organize records, and protect the small, quiet world she had built. Her son thrived in routine, her apartment a sanctuary. It was in the mundane, the ordinary, that she felt safest, and she had no reason to suspect that the man whose name she had learned to respect was dismantling the very power he had wielded so effortlessly. One evening, they crossed paths in the hallway again. Seo-rin, he said, his tone neutral, professional. I have adjusted the archives for long-term maintenance. You will not need to handle them tonight. She blinked, surprised. I can manage. It's fine. No, he said firmly, but gently. It's done. You can leave on time. Go home. There was no explanation, no flourish, only the quiet authority of a man who had decided what mattered, and what didn't. For Seo-rin, it was unusual, but not intrusive. She simply nodded and left, unaware that his empire, the source of fear across Busan, was no longer his master, but his choice. That night, Do-yoon stood at the balcony of his penthouse. The harbor lights shimmered on the water, reflecting the calm he had long avoided in pursuit of control. For the first time, he felt unburdened. Power, he realized, had always been measured by what you could take. But strength, true strength, was measured by what you could leave behind. And for her. For Seo-rin. For the life she had carved out in quiet resilience. He would leave it all. Not as surrender. Not as defeat. But as an offering of possibility, a world in which she could thrive, unshadowed by fear, untainted by his past. For the first time, the man Busan feared had chosen a life not for himself, but for someone else. And in that choice, a new world quietly began to form. Weeks passed. Seo-rin's life continued in its familiar rhythm, her son's laughter at breakfast, quiet walks to school, evenings spent tending to small chores and the books that lined her apartment. Life was steady, predictable, and peaceful. Du-yoon, too, had settled into his new existence. The empire he once controlled with iron precision no longer demanded his attention. He moved through the city as any other man might, without fear, without expectation. The world no longer whispered his name in terror. And yet, he could not ignore the space COULDN occupied in his mind. Not as a desire for power. Not as a conquest. But as a presence he had never known before, a quiet, steadfast light that existed without seeking to dominate anything around it. Their paths crossed one afternoon at the Foundation. He was there officially, attending a minor meeting. She was cataloging old documents in the records room. Du-yoon, she said, looking up from her work. COULDN, he replied, careful, measured. They shared a small, polite smile. No titles. No pretenses. No reminders of the worlds they had once occupied. He gestured toward the window. The harbor looks peaceful today. It always does, she said. If you look closely, even chaos has its calm moments. For the first time, they spoke not as a woman and a feared man, but as two people who had learned restraint. Conversation flowed slowly, easily, unburdened by titles or fear. Du-yoon found himself offering small acts of kindness, fetching a stack of heavy records, adjusting a chair she was about to strain for, leaving her coffee warm on her desk. Nothing grand. Nothing expected. Just thoughtfulness. COULDN noticed, but she did not let it unsettle her. She was cautious by nature. She understood the value of consistency over gestures. And yet, she could not ignore the shift, a subtle warmth that had begun to fill the space between them. Days turned into weeks. Their interactions remained brief, professional, but each carried a quiet honesty. Laughter slipped in once or twice, a fleeting thing that surprised them both. Du-yoon realized that he was learning patience, a skill foreign to a man who once ruled by fear. He could not demand affection. He could not impose it. All he could do was exist beside her, quietly, faithfully, and hope that one day, trust, and perhaps love, might grow naturally. COULDN, in turn, began to recognize that this man, once a symbol of fear, was now simply a man who had chosen to step away from the shadows. A man who, by his own choice, had dismantled the structures that could have endangered her life. It was not a romance built on passion or spectacle. It was something rarer. A bond forged in respect, choice, and the freedom to exist safely together. In the quiet of the Foundation's upper floors, amidst the hum of fluorescent lights and the shuffle of papers, a new connection took root. A love without shadows. One neither rushed nor demanded. One that could grow strong, because it was built on equality, trust, and the courage to leave fear behind. And for the first time, Du-yoon allowed himself to imagine a future in which peace, and perhaps even happiness, was possible. The first light of dawn spilled over Busan, painting the harbor in soft golds and rose hues. The city stirred gently, unaware of the quiet transformations that had taken place within it, empires dissolved, fears let go, and two lives cautiously intertwining. COULDN walked along the familiar streets toward the Foundation, her steps steady, her mind calm. She carried nothing but her son's lunchbox and the quiet certainty that her life, though simple, was hers entirely. Du-yoon waited in the lobby, unannounced but unhurried. No power, no empire, no shadow of fear trailing him. Just a man who had chosen differently. When their eyes met, there was no hesitation, no surprise. Just recognition, two people who had shared moments of honesty, trust, and quiet courage. "Good morning, COULDN," he said softly. She smiled. "Good morning, Du-yoon." For a moment, they simply stood there, neither rushing, neither demanding. The city moved around them, but they existed in a space they had built together, a space free from past obligations, fear, or expectation. "May I walk with you?" he asked. She considered it, then nodded. "Yes." They stepped out together, the soft winter sun warming their faces, umbrellas forgotten. Their conversation flowed easily, without pretense or measurement. For the first time, Du-yoon felt the weight of his choices settle like a gentle tide. He had surrendered power. He had dismantled his empire. And yet, he had gained something far more valuable, a life that could coexist with hers, on equal footing, without fear or shadow. COULDN, too, felt a quiet liberation. The man who had once embodied control and distance was now simply a man walking beside her, respectful, present, and patient. She realized that peace was not only what she had fought to protect, it was what they could now share. They reached her apartment, and she paused at the door, glancing up at him. "I can't promise this will be easy," she said. "I wouldn't want it to be," he replied. "I only promise that it will be ours." Her smile widened, subtle and genuine. Inside, her son greeted them both with a bright laugh. Duyun knelt to greet him, offering no airs, no grand gestures, just a gentle presence, a quiet promise of safety. And in that small, warm apartment, surrounded by the ordinary things that mattered most, COULDN and Duyun understood something profound. Love was not about rescue. It was not about power. It was about choice. And now, for the first time, they could choose together. The city outside continued as it always had, unaware of the quiet revolution that had taken place in two hearts. But inside those walls, a new chapter had begun, one written not by fear, ambition, or shadow, but by trust, respect, and love freely given. In the heart of Busan, two people had found something rare, a future chosen, not taken. And for the first time in years, they both felt truly home. Don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe for more stories like this.